This is a homily for the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading is from the book of Joshua, chapter 24, verses 1 and 2, and verses 15 to 18. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. John, chapter 6, verses 60 to 69. Today is our fifth and final week reflecting upon chapter 6 of John's Gospel. We arrive at a watershed moment in the Johannine story, a moment of crisis. Our English word crisis comes from the Greek Kρίσις, which means judgment or decision. This Sunday's first reading from the book of Joshua is also about a decisive moment of judgment, and that's why it was chosen to complement today's Gospel reading. The Israelites are gathered at Shechem in the presence of the Ark, the symbol of God's presence in the midst of his people. Joshua, the undisputed leader of the Israelites, places before the people a choice that will shape their own self-identity. It will determine the path they and their descendants will travel for the rest of their lives. Choose today whom you wish to serve. They can no longer sit on the fence and keep their options open. Joshua puts three options before them. They can continue to serve their ancestral gods. They can opt for the gods of the people in whose land they are now dwelling, or they can worship the Lord. They must make a choice. Joshua is decisive about his own choice and the choice of his house. We will serve the Lord. The people reply, "We have no intention of deserting the Lord and serving other gods." They will remain faithful to the Lord, who delivered them from the land of Egypt, who worked great wonders before their eyes, and who preserved them throughout their great journey to the promised land. As we come to the conclusion of our 5 weeks' reflection on chapter 6 of John's Gospel, we too will come to a moment of crisis, a moment of decision. Let's have a quick review of the events recorded in chapter 6 of John's Gospel that have led to the moment of crisis in today's Gospel. I've been suggesting that it's helpful to use the analogy of a staircase. At level 1, we had the story of the miracle. Keep in mind that John uses the word sign rather than miracle. However, the people fail to understand the sign. They want to take Jesus by force and make him king. Jesus withdraws back to the mountain alone. The people find Jesus the following day in Capernaum. Seemingly oblivious to what Jesus had done the previous day, they ask for a sign. They remind Jesus that their ancestors had eaten manna in the desert. Jesus tells the people that it was not Moses, but God who gave them bread from heaven. It is the Father who gives the true bread from heaven. They reply, "Sir, give us this bread always." This brings us to level 3. Jesus replied, "I am the bread of life." The manna satisfied a purely physical hunger, but Jesus offers to satisfy a far deeper hunger. There are also echoes here of the wisdom tradition. As we've already seen, there are many references to personified divine wisdom in the Old Testament. Since the Hebrew word for wisdom, chokhmah, and the Greek word for wisdom, Sophia, are feminine, wisdom is portrayed as a female figure. Wisdom uses symbols such as bread and wine or water for the instruction she offers, and she invites people to eat and drink. John's Gospel subtly reveals Jesus as the very embodiment of divine wisdom. At level 4, we find that the bread that Jesus offers is more than divine wisdom. The bread of life that Jesus promises is his flesh and blood. Anyone who eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world. At this level, we are talking about the Eucharist. During the past few weeks, I've been emphasizing how important the Passover motif is in John's Gospel. New Testament scholar Francis Maloney tells us that for the Johannine community, what was done in the Jewish celebration of the Passover was but a sign and a shadow of the perfection of the gift of God in the person of Jesus Christ, the true bread from heaven, the bringer of eternal life to all who would believe in him. In Jesus Christ, the Passover traditions are enfleshed, not destroyed. We are now with Jesus in the synagogue at Capernaum. John tells us that Jesus said all these things while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. And how do the people react? After hearing what had been said, many of his disciples say, "This is hard language. How could anyone accept it?" Or literally, "This is a hard word," or saying. The word hard is a translation of the Greek word skleros. Skleros means difficult, not in the sense of being difficult to understand, but difficult to accept, harsh or offensive. So many of those listening to Jesus understood what he said, but it's one thing to hear and see things, it's something else altogether to make them your own. They can't accept it because it made a huge hole in their worldview. And so we read, many of his disciples went away and accompanied him no more. What is startling at this point of the gospel story is that the disbelief comes not from the opponents of Jesus, but from his own disciples. And it was not only a few, but many. What he had just been saying to them about himself was more than they could take. But what precisely do the disciples find difficult to accept? New Testament scholar Brendan Byrne offers this explanation. The aspect of his teaching they are referring to in making this complaint is not immediately clear. The most obvious explanation sees it as referring to what he has been saying about the Eucharist, that is, eating his flesh and drinking his blood. This could well be the case, but I think the offence is more likely to go back further, to Jesus' claim to be the bread of life come down from heaven, that is, to his incarnation, which will culminate in his self-gift upon the cross. This better explains Jesus' subsequent comment following the complaint. Then what if you were to see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? The sense of which seems to be, if you have difficulty accepting my claim to have come down from heaven, how much more difficulty will you be likely to have with the way I shall return there, which of course will be via the cross. What is at stake is a revelation of God, not only in the incarnation of the Son, but in the extension of that revelation in the Son's passion and death. As Jesus goes on to add in verse 63, grasping this revelation requires the influence of the Spirit. It is not something that human nature unaided, the flesh, can achieve. Remember that people were murmuring about Jesus because he said, "I am the bread that came down from heaven." The Greek verb translated as murmuring is gongudzo. The Septuagint uses this same verb about the Israelites in the desert during the Exodus. Here at Capernaum, some are having difficulty in accepting that Jesus is the bread of life come down from heaven, that he is a new manna, superior in life-giving power to the manna their ancestors ate. Brendan Burns says this: many of his audience, it would seem, felt more comfortable with precepts to live by, such as the Mosaic law. God would remain in heaven, they would keep the law, and all would be well. The reaction of these disciples calls to mind Plato's Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, which was written around 380 BC. The allegory is about some people who have lived in a cave since childhood. They are not free, they are shackled by the legs and the neck, and have no knowledge of the outside world. All they can do is look at the back of the cave in front of them. Because of the way in which they are shackled, they aren't able to turn around to see what is behind them. The only light in the cave comes from a fire, which is on the other side of a wall. On this other side of the wall, people pass by carrying various things. The shadows of this passing parade are cast on the wall of the cave. All that the shackled prisoners can see are the shadows on the cave wall. They can't see the people or objects behind them, nor can they see the fire. The shadows on the wall are their reality. But one prisoner escapes from the cave and goes outside into the sunlight for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When he is told that the things around him are real and the shadows are mere reflections, he can't believe it. But he gradually becomes accustomed to the new reality. He returns to the cave to tell the others what he has seen and hopes to set them free. But he is ridiculed. Those still in chains cannot understand his fanciful stories about life outside the cave. They think that the light has affected his eyes. They resist his attempts to free them. If they could have freed themselves from their chains, they would have killed him. The allegory of the cave describes well the kind of reaction that people often have when their worldview is turned upside down. They reject the messenger, sometimes violently. The rejection of Jesus is a note sounded right at the very beginning of John's Gospel. In the prologue we read, "The world did not recognize him. He came to his own, and his own people did not accept him." Jesus is the light of the world, but many of his disciples preferred the darkness. They preferred shadows to reality. Jesus then turns to the 12. Do you want to go away too? This question is also directed to us. Will we choose Jesus despite the incredible claims he makes? Or will we decide to stay where we are, satisfied with the lives we are living? Most people who call themselves Christian were baptized as infants. Their parents and godparents professed faith for them. But there is no way that we can escape making a believing commitment of our own, especially once we begin to realize what being a committed Christian costs. Simon Peter answers, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life, and we believe and we know that you are the Holy One of God." This scene immediately calls to mind the question that Jesus puts to his disciples at Caesarea Philippi in the Synoptic Gospels. Who do you say I am? As in the Gospel of John, it is Simon Peter who answers on behalf of all the disciples, "You are the Christ." Australian author James Cohen has written a book entitled Journey to the Inner Mountain and subtitled In the Desert with St. Anthony. When Cohen visited the monastery of St. Anthony, located at the foot of Mount Kolzim, 334 kilometres southeast of Cairo in Egypt, he sought permission to visit the cave of St. Anthony of Egypt, the father of Christian monasticism. The cave where St. Anthony lived as a hermit is about 2 kilometres from the monastery. Cohen was advised that a monk had recently taken up residence as a hermit in St. Anthony's cave, but the guest master gave him permission to climb up to the cave, provided that he agreed to carry a week's supply of bread for the hermit. He was warned, though, that he would have to wait for the hermit to give him a signal, allowing him to continue his climb. If he thinks you are from Babylon, he may well decide not to wave you on up, the guest master explained. Cohen then asked, "And if he does wave me on up, what city have I come from?" "Why, Jerusalem, of course." These were the two psychic poles of this anchorite's world: Babylon, the city of material entanglement, and Jerusalem, the celestial city. As Cohen climbed the mountain, he saw a man dressed in the habit of a Coptic monk. The monk raised his hand and waved him to come on up. He had obviously passed the first test. Babylon was not his home. As Cohen introduced himself, the monk replied in perfect English. He wasn't Egyptian at all, but Australian. Father Lazarus had been a university lecturer in literature and philosophy, and he'd been an atheist for about 40 years of his life. In a short film, The Last Anchorite, Father Lazarus spoke about his spiritual journey. "I am Father Lazarus of the Coptic Orthodox Church. I have come from Australia. I'm Australian. I was. My name is particularly relevant to my life because it means the one who was resurrected. So I chose this name both for its power of resurrection, because I was not Christian all my life. I have become a monk and a Christian at the same time and changed my life completely. So it was like I was dead and I came to life. Before, I was a man proud of himself. I was sure that I am the captain of my ship and the master of my fate. I was sure that I am the one who determines my own destiny. Now I believe that I am in the hand of the Lord. I believe that I have changed completely from being the master of my own life to being the loving servant, the slave of Jesus Christ." Father Lazarus, like St. Anthony of Egypt, so many centuries earlier, had embarked on a voyage into the unknown, with only Christ as his compass. Along with Simon Peter, he was able to say, "You have the words of eternal life, and I believe." In Peter's response, we come to the heart of the Christian faith. Jesus has the words of eternal life. Some people will respond to this claim in the same way that many of Jesus' disciples reacted to his teaching. This is hard language. It's politically incorrect. In an age of relativism, the only absolute truth is that there are no absolute truths, and therefore no religion can claim to have a privileged insight into the reality of God. George Weigel offers this reflection. In a culture that rates tolerance the highest virtue, and imagines that tolerance means indifference to questions about the truth of things, the unambiguous claim that this is the truth, and that all other truths incline towards this truth as iron shavings incline to a magnet, is not just controversial, it's an outrage. New Testament scholar Tom Wright would agree, and says this about the uniqueness of Christ. I know people, professing Christians, for whom it seems that their central article of faith is their rejection of this idea of Jesus' uniqueness. The trouble with this is that it doesn't work. If you dethrone Jesus, you enthrone something or someone else instead. The belief that all religions are really the same sounds nice and democratic, though the study of religions quickly shows that it isn't true. What you are really saying, if you claim that they're all the same, is that none of them are more than distant echoes, distorted images of reality. You're saying that reality, God, the divine, is remote and unknowable, and that neither Jesus nor Buddha nor Moses nor Krishna gives us access to it. They all provide a way towards the foothills of the mountain, not the way to the summit. It isn't just John's Gospel that you lose if you embrace this idea. The whole New Testament, the whole of early Christianity insists that the one true and living God, the Creator, is the God of Israel, and that the God of Israel has acted decisively within history to bring Israel's story to its proper goal, and through that to address and rescue the world. Simon Peter, speaking for the 12, says, "We believe." New Testament scholar Marcus Borg points out that prior to the 17th century, the English word believe did not mean believing in the truth of statements or propositions. He explains, grammatically, the object of believing was not statements, but a person. Moreover, the contexts in which it is used in pre-modern English make it clear that it means to hold dear, to prize, to give one's loyalty to give oneself to commit oneself. In other words, it's not information that makes a disciple. One becomes a disciple through a spirit-filled response to the Father who is made known in the word of Jesus. St. John Henry Newman makes an important distinction in an essay in aid of a grammar of assent. The distinction is between notional assent and real assent. Notional assent means that I agree, but it has absolutely no impact on my life. Here's an example of what I mean. Craig Keener is a contemporary American biblical scholar, but he hadn't always been a Christian. In fact, he was once an atheist. One of the factors that confirmed him in his atheism was his observation that the majority of Christians in his own country, the United States, only gave their faith a notional assent. He says this: "When I was an atheist, one of my central objections to believing anything about Jesus was that 80% of people in my country claimed to be his followers, yet most of them apparently lived as if it made no difference for their lives." That is quite different to Newman's understanding of real assent. Something becomes real to me. It has a profound influence in defining who I am and what I do. This is what a conversion or real assent to Christianity meant for Craig Keener. I reasoned that if I believed that there was truly a being to whom I owed my existence and who alone determined my eternal destiny, I would serve that being unreservedly. That is precisely the assent that Peter and the 12 give to Jesus. He has the message of eternal life, and their lives were transformed by that message. Having arrived at the conclusion of chapter 6 of John's Gospel, all that is now left for us is to respond to Jesus' question, to make our own, by the grace of God, the words of Simon Peter. You have the words of eternal life, and we believe.